Howdy, and welcome back to the Ineligibles podcast. My name is Will Stone. You can follow me on Twitter at WillStoneCFB. You can follow our YouTube page at IneligiblePod on YouTube. Been pushing that lately. YouTube has really grown. You guys have been awesome. We're creeping up on 300 subscribers, so yeah, just keep at it, and we'll keep on making content. But very excited about our guest today. Been trying to delve more into the analytics side of this sport. I think it's super interesting and adds a lot of great context to the sport that we all love so much. But my guest today is Mr. Kelley Ford. Kelley, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, Will. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. So before we get too far into it, where can people find you and see some of your work?
Yeah, for sure. So you can find me on X at KFord Ratings, the website, kfordratings.com. Everything that I'm posting throughout the summer months here, and then as we get into the season, we'll be on one, if not both, of those places. And there's a lot of content that I plan to produce on a weekly basis during the year. So you can keep up with all of it there at KFord Ratings, kfordratings.com.
Awesome. So I like to ask this of people that I get on the show that are not from our little maroon sphere down here. So as a college football fan in general, and like not any stats or anything, like what's your opinion of this A&M football program and kind of what they've been over the past, I don't know, 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, so general opinion of Texas A&M football is great fan base. I mean, obviously, everything the Aggie chants and Kyle Field is one of the biggest stadiums in college football. And man, when you guys get up for a game, you get up for a game, and it makes for a great environment. You think all the way back to Johnny Manziel years and the success you had right away joining the SEC, which I think took a lot of people by surprise, probably myself included, at that time.
Same
And
here, yeah.
yeah, so like Texas A&M proving right away that you can throw your weight around and really compete with the best. I would say in the last 5 years, because that's what you asked, probably just candidly, maybe a little bit of disappointment, a little bit of falling short of the expectations. What was it that 2022 class that was number one in the country, maybe, or 2021, one of those years, number one in the
Yeah.
country, had some of those guys transfer out, didn't necessarily have quite the impact, I don't think, that maybe some had expected. And it's still possible that some of that could come as they continue to mature and progress through their years of eligibility. But just from a talent standpoint, and then and then the corresponding record, probably a little bit disappointing there during and near the end, especially of the Jimbo Fisher era. A lot of excitement with Mike Elko coming in and what he was able to do at Duke, of all places, right? Like great basketball, not really known for football, at least in recent times. And he was able to have a lot of high-level success. So I think it's a really exciting time for A&M right now, and certainly talent hasn't really been the issue for A&M in terms of the last 5-10 years. It's been the results on the field, and with the exception of maybe the COVID year, right, the 2020 season. And so that's kind of what I would say as a neutral, someone who's not in the Texas A&M circle. I'm not even in the SEC circle, right? Like I don't live in the Southeast, and so certainly have my finger on the pulse of all things SEC and A&M, because that is the preeminent conference in college football. And if you're doing what I do from a power rating standpoint, you're going to take notice of the best conference that's out there. But that's kind of what I would say from a neutral. If you look at this year, which I know we're going to talk a lot about, I think there is a lot to be excited about with regard to how potentially strong this team is, how talented they are, and then also, and maybe more importantly, the schedule that A&M has, especially within conference play. So certainly 2024 is a year of great optimism, and we're going to find out right out of the gate, week one, what this team's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you nailed that. Like as far as talent goes, it got better under Sumlin, and then it got as good as ever maybe under Jimbo, and the results on the field just didn't follow that. So I think disappointing is very accurate. That's how we have all felt over the past, especially the past two or three seasons. But it is exciting right now, and we all like a lot about what Coach Elko is doing. A little more modern on offense with Colin Klein. But before we get too far into the weeds, I guess we'll get into the weeds on. I feel like maybe 15 years ago, and like as I was growing up watching football, the conversations when trying to compare teams were like, oh, like, well, this team was ranked this, this team beat that team, but they lost to this other team. And all that's just kind of boring and not very productive whatsoever. So I guess tell me about like your system and I guess what a power rating is as compared to just like your regular AP poll.
Yeah, this is a very important conversation and great context to kind of set the foundation for any conversation, informed conversation that you're going to have with anybody about college football in the year 2024. So, from a power rating standpoint, and ultimately that's what I'm trying to do with the K Ford ratings, and using that we can do a lot of other things. But at the essence of all the content I generate is the power rating model, and you have to give credit. We were talking a little bit before we came on the air about Bill Connolly and Brian Fremeau, SP Plus and FEI. Those two guys, in my opinion, are the godfathers of college football predictive analytics. The work that they've done really for the last almost 20 years now, certainly the last 15 plus years, really laid the foundation for a lot of people to follow, including myself. And so what we're trying to do with the power ratings is objectively quantify and capture the predictive nature and elements of college football and bundle that up into one number and use that to project forward how good or bad relative to average is this team. How good or bad can this team be expected to be relative to average as we look forward? So what you're doing with a power rating at the end of the day, and there's a lot of things that go into it, and those things are different depending on what time of the year it is. In the preseason, we have specific inputs, and those get weighted a certain way, and I've tweaked the weights to that in 2024 as you build a roster differently now than you did even just a couple years ago. So that's been evaluated and updated. And then once we get into the season, you replace and you phase out the preseason data with the much more informative in-season data. And that's really, after 2, 3, 4 games, what a team is and what a team isn't. So from a power rating standpoint, though, you're looking for one number, and it's going to tell you, okay, if these two teams played tomorrow, what would you project the spread to be on a neutral field? And then, of course, you can apply your home field advantages as you see fit. And everybody kind of has their own that they're working on there. 2.5 has kind of been an industry standard in recent years, but trying to get that home field advantage right is just another piece of it. That's what you're doing with power ratings. And then from that, you're able to extrapolate all sorts of different things. Like I said, you can project a spread for any given game. You can project a win expectancy for any given game. When you multiply those together, add them together over the course of the year, you can generate a season win total that would be expected, both overall or in conference play. You can get a percent chance that a team is going to win at least X number of games. So what's the chance that A&M goes bowling this year? I've got a 98 or 97% chance that A&M wins at least 6 games. What's the chance that A&M wins at least 10 games this year? For me, right now, that's a 20% chance. What's the chance that A&M goes 12-0 during the regular season? There's a 1% chance of that for me right now. So you can do all of that. You can generate offensive and defensive unit ratings, which then correlate into rankings. And then what a lot of people care about, you can project what does the 12-team playoff look like at the end of the year if you simulate the season using kind of the aggregated expected results of every single team season and how that all plays out. And then that'll give you their win totals, but that's not enough. We need to determine how impressive is that win total that you achieved. So by looking through a common lens at every single team's schedule, all 134, look at that through the same lens and say, what would be expected of the fill in the blank? I use the number 12 power rated team. You can use whatever denominator you want. How would the number 12 power rated team be expected to perform against this schedule? Would they be expected to win 7 games, 8 games, 9 games, 10 games? And then how many wins against that schedule did your team actually achieve? You can create this fraction, right? And then all 134 teams have a fraction, and you can stack those up greatest to least. And that's a way you can generate objective resume rankings using those power ratings as an engine. So we can do all of those things. I do watchability scores with this. I do what if rankings. So what if you flipped the every single one possession game in college football? What if you flipped the outcome and the other team won? We can do all of that. We can do schedule difficulty analysis. There's tons of different things that you can do, project one score game outcomes, all using the power rating. So that's really what I'm trying to do. It's a creative, fun way to view college football teams. And I always tell people that the power ratings, for as much as I believe in them, for as much as I have the proof, like the empirical data, that they are accurate more times than not, and that they do lead people to have success if you're into sports wagering and things like that. All of that is good. But at the end of the day, what's really important is it's just one of the many viewpoints that we should be taking to view a college football team, to view a conference race, to view the national championship. You can't just take the model to be the end all be all. It provides good context, and it gives you kind of a baseline foundation to have a conversation, but certainly things come into it that the model's not considering: the weather, certain injuries, scheduling dynamics. Is your team coming off of an off week and the opponent is not, or vice versa? Did you just play your biggest rival last week? Are you getting ready to play your biggest rival next week? How does that impact the game this week? Is this a weeknight game? Is all of these things, that's important, and they're gonna help inform how a game goes. The model doesn't necessarily see all of those things. In-game coaching decisions, that's something that we're working on quantifying as well, but that's probably not explicitly accounted for in the model as much as I would like as things stand right now. So it's not the end all be all, but it certainly gives us a starting point for conversation on Texas A&M or any of the other 133 teams that are playing FBS football.
Right. I think adding context is my favorite way to describe that. Like it's not just like it like you said, it's not everything. Like you have Georgia, I think you have Georgia ranked number one. It's not just saying, oh well, don't play the season because we have Georgia as the best team, so it doesn't really matter what happens. Like it's just like, hey, this is what we know and how we can like have a starting point to build off of, and then you add in everything else, and then look at matchups and all that sort of thing. So it just adds so much more color and context to the whole college football picture, really. Just real quick, a couple of the items that, or like I guess the specific like data points or data sets that go into that kind of model, because you're looking at like how a team plays and like how they play against who they play type of thing. Like I'm sure it's adjusted for opponent, but you're looking at like a success rate, PPA, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And opponent adjustments, that's probably the most interesting of anything, because that's really you try when you have a power rating model, you're trying to remove all biases and you're trying to make it as objective as possible. The opponent adjustment piece, that's almost as much art as it is science. And you're trying to figure out, how do you adjust for the different levels of competition faced over the course of the year? Because A&M schedule is not Ball State schedule, is not Texas State schedule, is not Washington State schedule. Like everybody's got, all 134 teams are playing the same sport, but they're not really playing the same sport. So how do we account for that? We spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. But yeah, some of those things that you talked about, I mean, Bill Connolly's 5 factors that he made famous, over a decade ago now, EPA's really taken on a life of its own in recent years. There's all sorts of different advanced statistics or analytical anecdotes that you can consider adding into the model. What actually gets into the model and how much weight does it get assigned? That's kind of the secret sauce, right? That's what separates the Kelley Ford ratings from SP Plus, from FEI, from ESPN's FPI. Like that's what makes everybody a little bit different. And those are kind of kept close to the vest for understandable reasons. But yes, those are the types of things that we're looking for. And again, it's different in season versus preseason, right? And so as we make our way through the season, that preseason weight, as it's getting phased out, we feel better and better about the projections that we have and the picture that we have of each team. Now, Vegas is getting better and better with that more information too. So it remains equally difficult to try to be better than Vegas or have a small advantage against them when you can. But yes, certainly, by week 4, 5, certainly you've got a really good idea of what a team is and what they aren't. And that's not to say that teams aren't still going to surprise us. And man, they were really slow out of the gate, or wow, they came out of the gate like a rocket and then just fell off a cliff after the 4th game or whatever it is. That still happens. But generally speaking, I mean, for 80% of teams in college football, maybe even more, by the time they've played a handful of games, we have a really good idea of what to expect. Now, one score games, like what's your record? What's that bounce of the ball look like in those close games? That goes a long way in determining the ultimate success or failure of a lot of team seasons from a win-loss record perspective. But from a power rating standpoint, we try to filter through that and try to drill down on what is the true strength of this team.
Got it. So I've always struggled to explain this, but in a 2-sentence or maybe explain like I'm 5 type of way, are you able to explain what EPA or PPA is?
Yeah, I mean, what you're looking for, like you're 5 and in two sentences, what you're trying to do is account for situation in the game, opponent that you're facing, and then ultimately, was the outcome of the play good or bad, successful or not? That's what you're doing, because 3 yards on 1st and 10 is not great. It's okay. It's really not great. You probably don't want that. 3 yards on 3rd and 2 is huge, right? And so
Right.
what you're trying to do is account for the opponent face, the situation within the game, and then assign a good or bad, and there's varying levels of that, to every single outcome. That's for the offense, that's for the defense, that's for special teams, and all of that is happening simultaneously in the game, and it's happening in multiple games right across college football at every single moment. That's why computer models and power ratings have become what I would consider, at least in our circles, a popular way to try to contextualize teams and races for conferences and CFP and all that stuff, because there's no way that any one person can watch even a tenth of every single college football game unless that's all they're doing 24 hours a day from Sunday until the next Saturday, right? And so the computer sees all, the computer can filter through those different things. And so that's what you're trying to do with really any advanced stat, is give context to what just happened, given all of these things that are going on. And ultimately, was that good or was that bad? And again, it's not that black and white, but that's how I would try to explain it in just a couple seconds.
I think people are skeptical of things they may not understand right away. And like with advanced stats, it's taking in every single play that every single team plays in every game, and it takes in as much data as possible and uses that to, kind of build the like what things are repeatable that this team is doing, and go from there. But
and every model wheel is going to have blind spots too, and so that might be a team, that might be a unit within a team, that might be you're hoping it's not too widespread depending on what kind of model you've got working. But that's why some people have taken the approach of aggregating multiple power ratings and generating kind of an aggregated power rating to try to filter out what are the outliers in the K Ford ratings, what are the outliers in SP plus, what are the outliers in FEI. And when you do that, you get as long as the inputs you're using are good, you're getting a better, truer, if you will, understanding of which teams are actually the best in college football. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have the best resume or should be ranked number one in a poll, whether that's the AP or the committee or whatever, but who from a power rating standpoint is the quote unquote best team. Aggregating good power ratings into one can help with that as well.
Right. So let's go ahead and get into A&M. You have them 16th in your K Ford ratings. I believe they came in at 20 in the AP poll. The schedule is not bad. It's not easy. It's still the SEC. But I guess like what are some things you see with this A&M team, and maybe like in terms of win total and what you expect out of them?
So right off the top, A&M, like you said, I have them number 16 in the power ratings. They were number 17 a year ago. They were number 36 in 2022. That was the worst A&M had finished in the power rating since 2017. So they're certainly trending in the right direction here. The offense right now, I'm projecting to be number 11. That would be the best offense A&M's had since the COVID year of 2020. If you take out the COVID year, you're going back, to 2014 in the CFP era for this offense being the best. On defense, I have them number 17, which is, for the third straight year, they're in the top 25, or excuse me, the fifth straight year, they're in the top 25 there. So that's kind of at a high level what we're looking here for A&M. If we dive down into each individual game and look at the schedule overall, I'm projecting 8-4 as the most likely record overall. I'm projecting 5-3 in conference play as the most likely record for A&M. They face the 17th most difficult schedule in the country. So like you said, it's difficult, but part of that is because they just play in the SEC, and almost any team are going to play in the SEC, with the exception of maybe like a Vanderbilt, is a really good team. And so you're going to get that. Within conference play, though, by SEC standards, it is the fourth easiest SEC conference schedule in that conference. It's number 13 out of 16 from a schedule difficulty standpoint. A&M misses Georgia. They miss Alabama. You miss Tennessee. You miss Ole Miss. You miss Oklahoma, right? I mean, if you're building an SEC schedule, you might want to swap out, Texas. I know you don't want to because that's a rivalry game and we're going to get in that, but maybe swap out LSU for Vanderbilt. And that's about as good of a schedule as you could have asked for if you're an A&M fan. So the schedule sets up nicely. There's only one game this year that A&M right now has less than a 50% win expectancy by my numbers. That is the final game of the regular season at home against Texas. I have a 35% win expectancy for the Aggies there, but there are 7 games out of the 12 that are currently projecting as a one-score game for me. Again, the Aggies are on the plus side of 50 in most of those, but that Texas game at the end is the only one in which A&M has less than a 50% win expectancy. So I think the schedule sets up really nicely from a week in, week out. But as we multiply together the win expectancies, that's how we get to that 8-4 as the most likely record. Given the schedule difficulty being number 17, I've got A&M needing 10 regular season wins to be in the at-large consideration for a CFP spot. They're right on that cutoff, though, between 9 and 10. And so if a couple teams overachieve and are on the schedule for A&M and are a little bit better than the preseason version 2 power ratings have them, it is possible that 9-3 A&M could certainly be in that conversation, especially how other things shake out for an at-large spot in the CFP this year. So again, if you go game by game, there's not going to be a single game on there that you're really looking at saying A&M is a decided underdog. So I think A&M fans should be really excited. I know there's a lot of new in College Station this year, and that week 1 game right off the bat against Notre Dame. I mean, Mike Elko against his former quarterback, both at new places, though. Like, it's just so many storylines. We've had all summer to build it up. These teams have been preparing all summer for that. It's going to be really interesting to see how that week goes, or how that game goes, because if A&M wins it, they're going to be off and flying and feeling really good. And then that Florida game in week 3 is the next kind of really big test. So A&M, if they're 3-0 after 3 weeks, like, CFP is absolutely on the table, and that's what people are probably going to be excited about. There's also a scenario that's not too outlandish where A&M's 1-2 after 3 weeks. And if that's the case, people around College Station might think the sky is falling, even though the next few games are looking okay for A&M. So, man, there might not be another team in the country who could have a wider range of emotions after 3 weeks than A&M, depending on how those games go. Like, the start of the season is so important for A&M this year in particular, and it's just magnified by the fact that it's Mike Elko's first year, right? Like, first year head coach, first year coaching staff. Like, there's just so much that goes into these first 3 games. But A&M, I think, on the surface, should be pretty excited about what's going on in College Station this year.
We are, and in most cases, you get a first coach and that sort of thing, and you get that cupcake to kind of work your way up. But that has not happened for us this year. We get Notre Dame right off the bat, then you get a little bit easier game, then it's on the road at Florida. A&M hasn't won on the road since 2021, and I don't think Florida is that great, but a road game still makes me a little bit nervous, until I see us go out there and do it. But in terms of, I think a lot of folks would be surprised that the offense is rated higher than the defense, because right now we're all like, oh, our defense is going to be awesome. Offense, we don't really know. So I guess, like, kind of behind that, is that looking at their performance from last year, is it looking at Connor Wigman coming back, or just kind of all that put together?
Yeah, so it's a combination of everything. When you're in the preseason, you're looking at 3 things for me, and that's returning production, it's your recent Kelley Ford ratings, and it's your recent recruiting at the high school level. And I've reevaluated how I weight those, as, again, college football rosters are constructed much differently in 2024 than they were just a couple years ago. But by using that, we can then do that on both sides of the ball as well. And so, yeah, I'm just double checking really quickly what is causing that for A&M. And as I pull that up, it's just those factors as we break them down to the unit level. And again, it's relative to the rest of college football. So it's their actual unit ratings are very close, the offense and defense, but a rating that A&M has on offense of 89 comes out as the number 11 best offensive unit in the country. The defensive unit rating is 87, so very, very close. That's number 17. So there are just what my numbers are suggesting, at least right now, version 2 preseason power ratings, there are a higher number of, I'd say elite. Anytime you got a unit rating of 87 or better, I mean, you're in elite category, certainly very, very good to elite category. There are a higher number of elite defenses in college football this year from a projection standpoint than there are offenses. And that is in part what's pushing that A&M defense down just a little bit, because you're right. As we go back, especially, 2021, 2022, even last year, the defense has been better power rated than the offense, really, for much of the CFP era, with only a couple exceptions. So that is interesting. It's something that I hadn't really drilled down into until you asked the question.
Well, and it was different numbers, but we saw something similar with the SP Plus from Bill Connolly, and our fans were like, "Oh, like, our offense is going to be that good?" Like, we were all kind of excited, and it didn't make a ton of sense. But when you look at it through that lens of, hey, there's a lot of really good defenses, and the margins are probably very slim. It's
are.
not like, oh, like you're a distant 17 in defense. You're just like you're kind of in that next tier, after presumably Ohio State, Georgia, and those types of teams.
Correct. Everyone's kind of bunched up right there. And yeah, Bill, like I said, being a CFP or a college football predictive analytics godfather, I did see he dropped his final updated SP Plus ratings. I have not dove into those, but I certainly use those as a benchmark for my own. So I'm very happy to hear that we're kind of in alignment there. It's always good. It's reassuring when your model is in lockstep, more or less, with Bill Connolly. You know you're on at least the right track at that point is kind of how I put it.
Yeah, and I think what's exciting for A&M fans is how positive these numbers look. And like 8-4, we wouldn't love it. We'd be okay. Like it's not the end of the world. There's probably a good win in there somewhere. Hold on hope for 9-3, maybe 10-2, best case scenario. But these numbers, like no one's numbers know that Mike Elko's the head coach now. That Jimbo Fisher is not running the program, and so many things are different. I think that gives A&M fans a lot of hope that it's not quantifiable yet, but once we get into the games, once we get in, past Notre Dame, Florida, maybe the numbers uptick a little bit if there is an impact from the new coaching hires and that sort of thing.
Certainly. And I've been working, that was a big project for me this off season was coaching grades, coaching ratings, if you will. And Mike Elko graded very well in his tenure at Duke. And basically what you're trying to do is how much success did they have? How good from a power rating standpoint was this team? And then you're trying to, okay, so you have a number there, but how does that compare to the recent history of that program, right? Like, because if you come into Ohio State or Georgia and you're really, really good, okay, well, they've been really, really good. If you go into Duke and have a lot of success, that stands out a little bit more because that's not a program that at least recent history has suggested you're going to have a lot. So I've been working on those coaching grades, coaching ratings for the head coaches, for the coordinators, and I am playing around with how to incorporate those into the model moving forward, but I have not had a chance to do the level of testing, back testing that I would like on that to feel comfortable putting that into the model just yet. So that might be something that gets more explicitly accounted for me personally in 2025, but you're absolutely right that there's things like that for a lot of models, mine included, admittedly for now, that we're not capturing, we're not seeing. And again, that's just, it's a 30,000 foot view to give some context. All these other considerations are important and should be a part of the conversation as well, as you just noted.
Right. Have you found a good way to factor in transfers? Like, do you use the transfer rankings from some places, or just kind of go in a different way, I guess?
So I'm really not big into using transfer rankings. I mean, I'm really not even that big. You have to a degree, use high school recruiting rankings just because the data that you have on those high school players is not as good. It's not as useful, I would say, for me as someone who's trying to make numbers as college transfers. Like, I don't need to use transfer rankings because each of these players who comprise a transfer class, whether that's in or out or whatever, they have a returning production value associated with them because they were somewhere last year playing college football, whether that was at a Power 4 school, a G5 school, an FCS school, they were somewhere and they were playing. So they have a returning production value associated with them. What I spend more time doing, again, this is kind of more art that comes into it here, like the opponent adjustments. You have to have some art here to assign the multipliers, the scale of, okay, so this really good receiver just transferred to A&M. I'm making this up. Just transferred to A&M from Texas State. And he had a ton of great numbers at Texas State. But Texas State doesn't compete on a week in, week out basis in the SEC. So we're going to downgrade his production a little bit, not a ton, but a little bit, because we don't expect that same level of production he had at Texas State to translate to A&M. Similarly, if you go the other way, okay, this tight end from A&M just transferred to Texas State. He was pretty darn good at A&M. I think he's going to be a stud at Texas State because that level of competition is different, right? So that's what I spend more time doing. One is just tracking where all these players are going. Like, that's become increasingly difficult with the transfer portal, the free transfer, the COVID year of eligibility. All these things have made it just harder to track who is where, which is why it takes me so long to get the final preseason ratings out in August every single year. But then also, once we know where they are, how do we, in a way that's backed by math, but also there is some art in there, how do we try to scale or multiply their production from their old school to their new school? That's what I spend more time doing. I don't spend a lot of time looking at 247 Sports or ESPN or Rivals or whoever's doing it now, looking at their
Right.
transfer classes. Because also, if you load it up with 10 5-star transfer receivers, you're probably going to have a pretty good recruit or transfer class. You're not going to play 10 receivers, though. So you had a redundancy there. You really needed some offensive linemen. You didn't do that. My model sees that. It's not just looking at the mass collection of talent through the transfer portal. Talent matters. Stars matter. I'm not suggesting they don't, but it's a little bit deeper than that as you're trying to articulate what is returning production for these different teams.
So that brings us to some of our opponents. We talked a lot about Notre Dame here on the show recently, but let's talk more about Texas, LSU, and Missouri. Texas is a team that brought in some transfers that have done big things at other places. Isaiah Bond at Alabama, Silas Bolden, and some other guys like that. So I know that they lost a lot to the draft, and they do recruit well, but they brought in the transfers as well. So is that something that is kind of keeping Texas in that top 5 range in your ratings?
Yeah, certainly. And Texas is a team because until last year, they're a team that I took a lot of grief for. Because if we look at what their power ratings were, let's go all the way back to 2017, number 25, 2018, number 22, 2019, number 21, 2020, COVID year, weird year for a lot of teams, number 9, 2021, number 24, 2022, number 7. So Texas wasn't performing in the Big 12 at a level that you would expect of a team that's consistently being power rated inside the top 25, inside the top 10 on almost an annual basis, especially in recent years, until last year when they finally broke through, made the CFP. But I still had them number 7. I had Texas power rated ranked the same in 2023 when they went to the CFP as 2022 when I can't remember off the top of my head. Maybe they lost 4 games. I think it might have been from a 4 or 5. So from a power rating standpoint, those two teams are very comparable. Now, the bounce of the ball, their record in 1-score games, turnover luck, those things change. So the record looked different from a talent standpoint, from a quality standpoint. They were quite similar. This year, Texas is number 4. So I think they're going to be, this is the best Texas has looked at this stage in the CFP era for me and my model. Number 4 on offense. That's the best offensive unit ranking they've had in the CFP era. Number 12 on defense. They've only been top 10 one time in the CFP era. That was 2017. So Texas, it's not that now all of a sudden, hey, they had some success last year. The model thinks they're going to be really good. The model's been high on Texas for a while. It's just taken Texas a while to get there from a win-loss record to validate, in a lot of people's mind, that high power rating. So, yeah, Texas is, I think, are going to be a really good team. An underdog and projected underdog in only 1 game. The easiest SEC conference schedule belongs to the Texas Longhorns. Texas does not play Alabama. They do not play LSU. They do not play Missouri. They do not play Ole Miss. They do not play Tennessee. It is the easiest 8-game conference slate in the SEC by my version 2 preseason power ratings. And again, only an underdog in 1 game, week 8 at home against Georgia. I already talked about that week 14 game rivalry week on the road at A&M. That is projected to be a 1-score game. I've got 4 games this year that Texas is projected to be in 1-score games. 3 right now, they have a greater than 50% win expectancy. The Georgia game, the only one that they're under. So I think 10-2 is most likely. I think 10 is the number that they need to get into that CFP at-large conversation or to feel good about it. But I do have Texas right now as slotted to play in the SEC championship game against Georgia.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then real quick, I know you got to go. Let's hit Missouri and LSU, 2 of the big 4 that A&M plays, all at home this year. Are you expecting big jumps from them? Missouri, great year last year. Can they sustain it? LSU, great offense, kind of poor defense. Can they kind of balance out?
I'm going to start with LSU because I think the Missouri storyline this season is even a little bit more interesting. LSU, for me right now, is projected number 4 in the SEC projected conference standings, 5.2 conference wins on average, trailing Georgia's 6.5, Texas is 6.4, and Alabama's 5.5. A&M, for what it's worth, projected at 4.8. So right there in that mix as well. I mean, they're all bunched up in that area. LSU had the number 1 offense in the country last year. I'm projecting them to have the number 3 offense in the country this year. The difference, though, is on defense. At least that's what LSU fans are hoping. It was number 71 a year ago, and certainly what held that team back from higher aspirations and achievements a year ago. Number 71 is not good enough for a program like LSU that has access to talent and historically, especially on that side of the ball, has been as good as they've been. I'm projecting an improvement this year up to number 34. If you look at their schedule, it's number 12 out of 16 in terms of conference difficulty or schedule difficulty within conference play in the SEC. So certainly LSU fans should feel good about their conference slate that they have. I have 9-3 as the most likely overall record. There are 7 games on the schedule that I currently project LSU to either be favored or an underdog by just 1 score, including being an underdog in Week 9 at A&M, a 43% win expectancy for LSU. So much like a lot of these teams are talking about as contenders in the SEC, what is their record going to be in these 1-score games? That is largely going to determine a success or failure of a season from a record standpoint for a lot of these teams, including LSU. So if I'm looking at the games right now that LSU is a projected underdog, though, it's only 2 at A&M in Week 9. They're off in Week 10, as is their Week 11 opponent, Alabama, at home in Death Valley there. Those are the only 2 games, and at 43% win expectancy or better in both. So, I mean, LSU's got it all in front of them as well, like a lot of these teams at the top of the SEC. Missouri's maybe the most interesting team in the SEC for me this year, and here's why. I actually think Missouri is going to be slightly worse this year than they were a year ago. Not much. They were number 14 in my power ratings last year. I'm projecting number 15 this year. The offense might be improved. I've got them as a top 10 unit, and last year they were 12. I think the defense might take a step back. They were top 15 a year ago. I've got them number 20 now, so still really, really good, but maybe a step back. But here's what's so interesting about Missouri. They have the number 32 schedule difficulty overall, which, it's about average for Power 4 standards, but they are the only SEC team outside the top 30 when you're looking at all 12 games with regard to schedule difficulty. So it's the easiest 12-game schedule of any SEC team. They're number 15 in conference schedule difficulty, so only Texas has an easier SEC conference schedule than Missouri. The Tigers notably miss Georgia. They miss Texas. They miss Ole Miss. They miss LSU. They miss Tennessee. They miss Florida. So Missouri has got a very manageable schedule. I don't know if Missouri is going to have a year in which they have this much talent and this favorable of a schedule align in the same year again as they do this year. So basically what I'm saying is if Missouri doesn't find a way to make the playoff this year, I'm not sure if or when they will. Certainly at some point in the future they would if they missed it this year. But everything seems to be aligned this year for Missouri. There's only 2 games all year in which I'm currently projecting them to be an underdog. Week 6 at Texas A&M, but it's worth noting Missouri is coming off a bye the week before. I'm pulling up Texas A&M schedule really quickly. You guys are not. You have Arkansas, a neutral site the week before, so Missouri's going to have that scheduling dynamic advantage in that game, even though they're going on the road to Kyle Field in College Station. So that's one to keep an eye on. Week 5, they have to go to Alabama. They're going to be a decided underdog in that one, most likely. And then there's 3 other games that Missouri is projected as a 1-score favorite. Week 8 at home against Auburn. Week 11 at home against Oklahoma. Missouri's coming off a bye before that week. And then week 12 on the road at South Carolina. I think Missouri needs to get to 10 wins to be in that CFP at-large conversation because the schedule is as soft as it is, relatively speaking, and I've got a 31% chance that Missouri gets to that threshold. So Missouri, maybe more so than any other team, just because this is not a program that has historically been in that CFP conversation, but they have a really talented roster, perhaps their most talented of the CFP era, maybe last year's, maybe 2018, but it's right up there with those. And they have a schedule that's the easiest in the SEC overall, second easiest in conference. I don't know if or when those 2 forces are going to collide like that in the same year for Missouri again after this year. They have to take advantage this year in 2024.
And they still have Luther Burton for one more year. It's do or die time for the Tigers this year for sure. Well, Kelley, this was fantastic. I appreciate you coming on and keep doing what you're doing. Keep up the good work. It's at Kelley Ford Ratings on X, and hopefully we can get you back on soon. But I appreciate you and keep at it.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Will. I appreciate you having me on. It's been a lot of fun, and certainly look forward to hopefully doing it again soon. Good luck to A&M this year. Like I said, let's touch base after 3 weeks, because if you're 3-0, everything's rolling. If you're 1-2, the sky's falling, and if you're 2-1, we're somewhere in between. But it's gonna be interesting. We're gonna know a lot about A&M after 3 weeks, and I wish you guys the best of luck.
Yeah, it'll be here in no time. But we're looking forward to it. Thanks so much, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Will.
All right.